seen guns, you've heard cannons, but those weren't the scariest things out there in the American frontier. No, the real fear came when you saw nothing, then felt it. A club, a tomahawk, in the dark, in the woods. 1 second, and you were gone. And this is their story. They didn't shout, they didn't chant. They just came fast and brought pain. Your ribs folded, your spine gave out. You hit the dirt and never got back up. And that was the power of a good swing, of a weapon meant to destroy you. War clubs didn't care. Tomahawks weren't polite. They just did the job and left you behind. My name is Sam, and this is Wild America. Now, long before steel crossed the prairie, native warriors already trusted one weapon. Part 1. War clubs. Native American war clubs go back to the earliest periods of tribal warfare. Long before contact with Europeans, tribes across North America used clubs in battle. They were part of a broader tradition seen in many early cultures worldwide, where the club was one of the first weapons humans used. Over time, native groups developed their own distinct styles, adapting the basic form for different uses in war, ceremony, and status. Native tribes always shaped each head from what land gave: stone, antler, and then later iron when trade came in. Handles came from hard maple or oak, which is then shaped slow and then wrapped tight with rawhide so that nothing slipped when the air turned red. East of the Mississippi, warriors used ball-headed clubs made from a single piece of hardwood. The end was round and solid, like a fist. These clubs were well-balanced, slim, and heavy enough to break a skull. Some had metal spikes at the tip, and feathers hung from small holes. Each feather carried meaning, believed to give power to the one holding it. An Ojibwe scout might carry one for decades, then give it to his son the first time he smelled war in the wind. Now, although iron and steel changed the way warfare looked across much of the world, many Native American tribes kept using war clubs, refining them with new materials but sticking to the same close-quarters style. So yeah, the old clubs still had weight, not just in size, but in meaning. If a warrior killed with his club, he might leave it next to the body. No words needed. The club said enough. Other times he'd leave it deep in enemy land, like a challenge, and if the enemy picked it up, that meant war. Simple. And in the hot forests of the southeast, clubs got heavier. 2 or 3 feet of solid oak or hickory carved from one thick branch. The head bulged like a hammer. Some also had spikes made of bone or iron. Carvers near the Great Lakes added more. They'd also carve animal faces into the wood, like the open mouth of a bear or wolf seemed to bite down on the ball. Creek warriors called their clubs a tassa. Some made one edge flat like a wooden sword. Early visitors said it looked like a prop, but it broke bones for real. John Lawson once watched Catawba men dance with wooden swords under torchlight. Then came the red sticks. Creek rebels painted their clubs with red ochre. Red meant blood. Red meant war. Blood. Anger. It was a message, a promise. In Creek towns, if you raised a white stick, it meant you wanted peace. Even Creeks who sided with the U.S. painted their weapons before battle. In 1813, 700 Red Stick warriors attacked Fort Mims. It was close fighting, smoke, screams, clubs, and knives. And when the gates fell, the garrison became silent. The red clubs, now wet and still, told the whole story. For the Haudenosaunee, peace came with a white belt or a pipe. But a red or black club left on the trail meant war was coming. No one needed to speak. Some weapons had red handprints carved into them. They could mark past kills or serve as warnings. And all these signs were messages to the spirits, to the ancestors, to the powers the warrior trusted. And you know, some clubs got more wild, with stones tied in rawhide pouches. then fixed to a stick or straight to the wrist. When swung, the stone snapped out like a whip and flew back, never lost. One traveler saw Sioux riders race past, stones spinning beside them, cracking bones on the run. By the 1860s, a warrior might ride with rifle, bow, lance, tomahawk, and club, all at once. Old tools and new ones shared the same fight. Each land and tribe had its own style, but the goal stayed the same: make a weapon that worked even when smoke filled the sky. War clubs took a lot of work, especially when there wasn't a forge or anything, just a man, a knife, and the woods. To make one, he'd walk the river, looking for a smooth stone, one that felt right in his hand. Then he'd cut a branch of hickory or ash. It had to be hard, straight, patient wood. Then back at camp, he'd peel bark and scrape sinew from an old deer, then smoke it dry. And this is where stone met wood. He wrapped it with wet sinew, then rawhide over that. And as the sun dropped, the bindings shrank and held the head firm. Some tribes made clubs from a single piece of stone, shaped like short maces. They looked fierce, but most say they were more for show than battle. Speed mattered more, so most warriors used stone heads fixed to wooden shafts. Others turned to the trees themselves. They'd find a burl, a lump near the roots. Carve it right, and the ball head was already there, part of the handle. And as briefly mentioned earlier, in the southeast, some clubs had notches like alligator jaws, red paint, or rows of brass tacks. Bone and horn spikes were driven in, turning wood into a blunt, sharp blade. Resin filled the cracks. Smoke cured the glue. And when it was done, the club felt alive, ready for war. As for iron weapons, blacksmiths kept changing the shape. Out near the Missouri, they made longer heads, thin, maybe 7 inches, palm wide, balanced for horseback. Some had cutouts, crescent shapes that whistled when thrown. They came from old guns, bayonets, broken saws. Nothing got wasted. When iron broke, iron came back new. Then came a weapon that looked like something else. Now picture the wooden back of a rifle, without a barrel, just the grip and shoulder, carved from maple, 2 feet long. At the corner, a spike, horn at first, later steel from an old knife. Charge with that in hand, and the enemy might think you're still holding a gun. It weighs around 3 pounds, but the force lands on a small corner, hard enough to break bone. Some added a heart-shaped blade, like the officers' spears. Blood and honor mixed in one tool. By the 1860s, during the Plains Wars, Lakota riders still carried these clubs tied to their saddles. As mentioned before, warriors marked their weapons with signs only they could read. Leather wraps, quill work, brass, shell, red ochre. Some clubs had tallies, lines, and symbols that told a story, signs of power, of spirit. Among the Lakota, a club might carry eagle feathers, signs of a guiding spirit. Some had lightning bolts painted on, asking power from the thunder beings. Steel heads got marked too. Then, once metal came, warriors scratched in names or signs. At Horseshoe Bend, fighters' guns ran dry, but they didn't run. They fought hand to hand, clubs against bayonets, blades against rifle stocks. Many stayed, many died behind their barricade. And even when rifles ruled, a man with a hatchet and a plan was still a threat. Take the Fetterman fight, for instance. It was December, and there was snow on the ground in Wyoming. 81 U.S. soldiers walked into a trap. None made it out. Once the guns went quiet, warriors moved in close. They finished the fight with clubs and stone. One Cheyenne, named Woman's Dress, later said he used a stone war club that day. Some men were crushed, others cut. All were gone. Now, since carrying a weapon showed who you were, a man didn't just pick one up. He had to earn it. On the plains, you proved yourself first. Then you could carry a decorated club. Sometimes a club was given as a gift, a mark of honor. As mentioned earlier, you could tell who a man was by the shape of the club in his hand. And not every weapon was made to kill. Some were for counting coup, which were basically light sticks used to touch an enemy in battle. For the Plains, Cree, and Blackfoot, honor came in this way. In a counting coup, you touched your enemy without hurting him. You showed you could have killed, but didn't. It was a test of nerve, a way to show courage. Warriors carried coup sticks or clubs to show their bravery. But when things turned violent, the weapon did what it had to do. Nevertheless, these weapons had names. A warrior might treat his tomahawk like a brother. He'd talk to it, dream with it, trust it. These weapons were part of ceremony too. Before battle and after, warriors danced. For spirit, not show. For memory. War dances could last for hours. Men moved around the fire, holding their weapons high. Each step remembered a fight. It wasn't pretend, it was a reckoning, a prayer. One visitor wrote about the Catawba. He saw them dance with wooden clubs. They swung them like they meant it. For an hour or more, it was ritual. And farther west, during the sun dance, warriors tied buffalo skulls to themselves with rawhide. They pulled against the weight to offer their pain. Nearby, their weapons, bow, club, lance, stood stuck in the ground. And when the dance ended, they took them back. It meant something. They were still warriors, still walking the path. Even in childhood rites, weapons showed up. A boy might get a small club during his vision quest. It marked who he was becoming, a protector, a fighter, someone ready for a hard life. Furthermore, before battle, there were rituals. Medicine men blessed the weapons. They opened war bundles, inside, a special club or blade. A war leader might carry it wrapped up, never touched by others. It had gone through the sweat lodge. It carried prayers, and the spirits went with it. Some weapons were only used when things got serious, like the talisman clubs. They were used for survival, not small fights. The Cheyenne had their sacred arrows. The Arapaho had their spirit lances. Same idea. Weapons, yes, but also links to the spirit world. After battle, the weapons still had work. There were post-battle dances, ceremonies. Warriors came back and shared what happened, not always with words. The clubs told it. A cut in the wood, a bloodstain, a feather added after a kill. In the scalp dance, they circled the fire with clubs in hand. Scalps were tied on tight. Women sang. The fight became part of the night. And the club held the whole story, like a map carved in wood. Some woodland groups used clubs for execution. After torture, they gave one final quick, clean blow to the head. It was about ceremony and meaning. Also, some tribes said their war clubs came from legend. For instance, the Lakota told of the Thunder Chief's Club, a weapon no one could break. It always hit its target. The Iroquois had stories too. In the beginning, the great peacemaker threw weapons into a deep pit. He said there would be peace. But later, when justice called for blood, the war god took those weapons back out. And that's what war clubs were. Peace and war, both held in the same hand. Leaders knew this well. Tecumseh, for instance, brought a tomahawk to meetings. Sometimes he set it down, sometimes he didn't. If he shared a pipe with you, that meant something. If he didn't, that meant something too. And the Oglala told of Whirlwind's club, a weapon with a spirit that howled in battle. Not everyone could carry it, not all the time. It only came out when the danger was great. Now, although clubs stayed strong, iron was coming, and it came sharp. Part 2, Tomahawks. Truly, iron changed the game. By the 1800s, the fur trade was booming. Traders brought axe heads in crates. They traded it for furs, beads, and promises. Iron tomahawks were everywhere. Blacksmiths in places like St. Louis or Fort Michilimackinac made them by the barrel. They had a simple design, blade on one side, hammer on the other. They called them trade axes or belt axes. Small, light, easy to carry. Some came from overseas, English, French, even Russian. It didn't matter where they were made, as long as they worked. And they did? Pipe tomahawks spread fast, sharp on one end, hollow down the middle for smoking. They were carried in wagons, handed out by agents, or made by Lakota and Cheyenne smiths. Old clubs ended up on walls, their fighting days mostly done. Now slim iron blades went to war. Still, even without wood or feathers, the stories stayed. A warrior standing in tall grass, weapon in hand, heart pounding. He knew the next breath could be his last. All that mattered was the weight in his grip and the beat of his heart before the swing. Soon, many wore a forged hatchet on their belts, blade on one side, pipe on the other. Smoke before the fight, steel after. Out on the plains, however, warriors needed fast weapons that could reach far. Tribes like the Lakota, Cheyenne, Comanche, Arapaho, Kiowa, and Blackfoot each found their own way. Although we mentioned that iron hatchets came through trade, many tribes still trusted stone. They picked smooth river rocks, grooved the middle, and bent green wood around it. Wet rawhide held it tight, and as it dried, it shrank and locked the stone in place. You could feel the wood and rock move as one. Then, after horses arrived, handles got longer. From horseback, a man could swing wider, hit harder. And in the forests, weapons got smaller, tighter spaces, faster moves. A man could wait in silence, then strike quick. A sharp hatchet blow. Fast, quiet, done. On the frontier, however, a wounded enemy didn't always live. There are hard stories from the War of 1812. Some prisoners were killed after capture, with the tomahawk. It wasn't seen as cruel. It was war as they knew it. Don't leave someone behind who might return. After one battle, Frenchtown, people remembered. Remember the raisin, they said, and they feared the tomahawk more. But tomahawks weren't just for close fights. They could be thrown too. Not always, but when timed right, they worked. Some warriors, trained from boyhood, hit targets from 50 or even 70 feet, just a whistle and a hit. Eastern tribes were known for it. Stories tell of guards taken out with one silent throw. One tale, part truth, part legend, tells of a settler riding hard. A pipe tomahawk hit him in the back. Didn't kill him, thought, but it caught him. Still, throwing was risky. You gave up your weapon. It wasn't done on a whim. Maybe the first move, sometimes the only one. Or a man might carry two, one to throw, one to keep. And of course, clubs were harder to throw, too heavy. But some types worked, like rabbit sticks, weights tied to cords. A flying club or axe, however, could shake the enemy, break their formation, shock them. Then the warrior rushed in with a knife or a second axe, bare hands if needed. And colonial fighters took note. Leaders like Rogers trained their rangers to fire once, then charge in with blades. Rogers' Rangers used them in the 1750s during the French and Indian War. The habit stuck. In the War of 1812, frontier units still carried hatchets. Major Robert Rogers made sure of it. Regular troops used them too. The U.S. Army's 1814 manual said each rifleman should carry a small axe, rifle, knife, and hatchet. Not just Americans, though. British light infantry and German Jaegers used them too. You needed one out there, in the woods, on the trail. When your gun jammed or ran out, a blade could save you. So yeah, that wasn't new. Native warriors had done it long before. But up close, the damage was harsh. A war club swung right could smash a man's skull. Hats didn't help. Helmets didn't help. It could break ribs, crush lungs, and that was just a rock on a stick. However, tomahawks cut deeper. Metal blades, sharp enough to slice through bone. Warriors didn't waste hits. They aimed for the neck, the head, quick kills, clean scalps. Some reports said men were brained. Others were found with no scalps. These were signs of battle. Silence mattered too, you know. At dawn, during raids, speed and surprise were key. Guns gave away your spot. Clubs did not. Fear was a weapon too. When warriors charged with tomahawks raised, even trained troops sometimes broke. Once a line broke, the fight was over. That's how it happened at Little Bighorn. The lines fell apart. Chaos followed. Oglala, Cheyenne, and Sioux fighters flooded in, too close to shoot, just the smell of sweat, smoke, and blood. Some soldiers were shot, others were cut. Many were finished with clubs and hatchets, skulls crushed, limbs gone. The aftermath spoke for itself. Furthermore, sometimes tomahawks ended the fight. Among the Iroquois and other eastern nations, peace had a symbol. They buried the hatchet, not a figure of speech. They did it for real. Leaders would press tomahawks into the ground to show the war was over. No fancy words, just action. In 1680, Mohawk leaders and English officers met. They each buried a weapon, one for each side. That's how they sealed peace. The pipe tomahawk grew into something bigger. Leaders passed it like a promise. U.S. agents gave them as gifts. Elders used them at council fires. In treaty talks, they didn't just smoke any pipe. They smoked this one, the one with a blade. The smoke rose, and the words rose with it. They believed the Creator heard. Outsiders called it a peace pipe. It sounded simple, but it wasn't. To those in the circle, it was serious, stronger than words on paper. Even in old photos, you can see it. A chief holding a pipe tomahawk during a treaty signing. It was part of the promise. Tribes passed it around the fire too. When it came to you, you spoke, and everyone listened. Even after the fighting stopped, people remembered. By the late 1800s, tribes held powwows where veterans danced with old weapons to honor the past. Clubs and tomahawks were still carried and respected. You can still see them today. At gatherings, dancers carry sticks shaped like war clubs. Old-style tomahawks held with care. The blade might be dull now and the handle worn smooth, but it still speaks. Now, once a weapon was made, it still wasn't finished. It needed purpose. It needed spirit. Many warriors went off alone, to the hills, to the water. They fasted, prayed, waited for a vision. Maybe they saw a bear, a hawk, a storm, and that became their guide, their power. If a warrior saw a bear, he might sew bear fur on his tomahawk, or claws, or carve a bear's face into the club. It was basically a prayer made in wood. And as the frontier changed, so did its tools. But even when the guns got louder, the old blades still had something to say. Part 3, The Change of Time. And in time, settlers noticed. They saw how native warriors fought. They saw their tools. They saw what a war club could do, especially the gunstock kind. Some even copied them. You see? On the frontier, things moved both ways. Ideas, clothes, weapons. A trapper might carry a tomahawk. A soldier might learn to use a club. It was a tough land. People learned fast. They had to. Every trapper had one. So did most settlers. They were tools first, for chopping wood, hammering stakes, skinning game, and if needed, for fighting. One tool, many uses. Lewis and Clark gave tomahawks as gifts to native leaders. They wrote about it in their journals. Their men carried axes too. They used them when trouble came, and it came. They weren't the only ones, though. If this kind of story grips you, check out our channel after this episode. We've got more A lot more. The most feared native tribes. What nearly broke the Lewis and Clark expedition? Brutal frontier survival stories. Tips, trick by trick. All of it? But yeah, frontiersmen learned fast. They watched how native people used weapons and copied them. A tomahawk on the belt became standard. It weighed less than 2 pounds, easier to carry than a big axe. In the Rockies, many used the Hudson Bay hatchet. It had a wider blade. Same purpose, good for chopping, good for fighting. During the Seminole Wars, U.S. soldiers carried Bowie knives and hatchets, and that wasn't random. They needed tools that worked in Florida's thick swamps. Bayonets were useless in the brush, but a tomahawk, that could cut through vines and bone. The tomahawk also got into people's minds. The word came from the Algonquian language, and by the 1600s, it was in English. By the 1800s, newspapers used tomahawked to mean attacked by native warriors, even if it wasn't true. Books like The Last of the Mohicans kept the image alive. In it, the Huron used tomahawks. That helped lock the weapon into American memory. You see, most people thought every native warrior had one, but that wasn't always true. The image stuck, however. And you know, in the Civil War, some Confederate units from Indian Territory carried tomahawks. Cherokee, Creek, rifle in one hand, tomahawk in the other. A century later, in Vietnam, some U.S. soldiers carried them again. Even now, modern tomahawks exist. Some soldiers still carry them. It's more than a blade, after all. The shape still matters, and it still cuts. Even fashion picked it up. A white group called the Improved Order of Red Men used tomahawk symbols in their rituals. It was pretend, not native, but the symbol still carried weight. Settlers sometimes hung tomahawk replicas above their fireplaces as souvenirs, but the meaning was there: wilderness, survival, strength. By the late 1800s, rifles and revolvers had taken over. The tomahawk was no longer used in battle, but it didn't disappear. It stayed in stories. It became a symbol of the old frontier, a memory carved in wood and iron. And those stories lasted. Flying Hawk, an Oglala Sioux warrior, gave a well-known interview years after the Battle of Little Bighorn. He described how they charged into Custer's troops. He said, "The dust was thick and we could hardly see. We got right among the soldiers and killed a lot with our bows and arrows and tomahawks. Crazy Horse was ahead of all, and he killed a lot of them with his war club." Even though both sides had guns, much of the fight was hand-to-hand. Traditional weapons, clubs, tomahawks, were still deadly, and Crazy Horse's club became part of the story of victory. Another story comes from Cheyenne oral history. A woman named Buffalo Calf Road Woman became a legend. At the Battle of the Rosebud, just a week before Little Bighorn, she saved her brother by knocking a Crow warrior off his horse. She became famous, and some Cheyenne say that at Little Bighorn, she was the one who struck Custer. The story says she rode into the chaos and hit him in the back of the head with a tomahawk-like club. He fell. Then another Cheyenne woman, either Moving Robe or Annie Cheyenne, stabbed him with a spear. And after Custer died, others pierced his ears with sewing awls so he would hear better in the afterlife. Historians still debate what really happened, but Buffalo Calf Road Woman's story remains strong. It shows that women, too, picked up weapons when they had to, and their actions became legend. Another tale is from 1813, the Fort Mims Massacre, which we briefly mentioned earlier. A survivor, Joseph Jacobite, later told what he saw. The Red Stick Creeks had stormed the fort. He escaped by jumping over bodies and running into the woods. He said warriors were clubbing and tomahawking settlers, men, women, and children. One threw a war club at him. It missed his head by inches. He believed he lived only because of luck and confusion. Stories like this spread through newspapers, they shocked the public. The war club became known as a symbol of brutal conflict. And that's when the phrase, "they have raised the red stick," came to mean that war had begun. Furthermore, Tecumseh, the Shawnee leader, carried a unique tomahawk during the War of 1812. One end was a pipe, the other a blade, maybe a gift from the British. At the Battle of the Thames in Ontario, he led a charge against U.S. troops from Kentucky. When his pistol jammed, a U.S. officer later wrote that Tecumseh threw his tomahawk at the enemy and drew his knife. Moments later, he was shot and killed, some say by Colonel Richard M. Johnson. After the fight, an American lieutenant claimed Tecumseh's tomahawk as a trophy. Blood-stained, it was later shown off in Kentucky. Then there's Simon Kenton, a frontiersman who was captured by the Shawnee around 1778. They made him run the gauntlet and later sentenced him to death. As they prepared to burn him, Kenton headbutted a guard, grabbed the man's tomahawk, and fought his way out. He even threw the tomahawk at a warrior chasing him, taking him down. He managed to escape into the woods. The story spread fast. It showed how the tomahawk, often seen as a native weapon, could flip the story. A prisoner used it to beat the odds. Though the event happened earlier, people in the 1800s loved the story. It showed up in books, plays, and dime novels, part of the growing myth of the frontier. The Osage also tell of a warrior named Little Soldier who carried a giant war hatchet, said to weigh 20 pounds, though that's possibly an exaggeration. In a battle with the Kiowa, he killed their war chief with one blow. Then he stuck the bloody hatchet into the ground and dared anyone else to fight. But no one did. And so, the Kiowa backed off. The Osage still tell this story. It's about courage, about how their weapons held power. That axe became sacred, used in ceremonies for years until it was lost in a fire. Even more, Two Guns White Calf, a Blackfeet chief, owned a ceremonial tomahawk passed down from his father. He was known to perform dances at Glacier National Park in the early 1900s. Tourists watched as he held the tomahawk and told its story. "With this blade, my father counted coup. With this pipe, we made peace with the crow." And after his death, the tomahawk was given to a museum. And so, from the round-headed clubs of the Great Lakes to the red-painted weapons of the creeks, from the plains where warriors swung stone clubs from horseback, to the councils where pipe hatchets burned and passed from hand to hand, each weapon told part of the same story. A land in conflict, a people adapting, holding on. Tomahawks and war clubs stayed alive, in museums, in memory, in stories passed down, in tattoos and carvings. That image of a warrior holding his weapon still means something. It's about pride, strength, refusal to give in. To understand these weapons is to understand that time. It was hard. Every choice mattered. These tools were courage, shaped in wood and iron. On the old frontier, however, where life was never certain, the tomahawk and war club were close by. For lighting fires, for hunting, for guarding the village, for war. They stayed until the very end,